21 points proving blacks were in ancient America before Mongoloids and Columbus. Point number 1. The first Americans, or Paleo-Americans, were blacks. This reality is based on the skeletal remains of Naia and Luzia. Naia and Luzia were Negroes or blacks. Point number 2. Black Africans, according to researchers, have been in Brazil since 100,000 BC. Evidence that fire existed in Brazil 65,000 years ago is an indication that man was at the site 65,000 years ago. Since researchers found charcoal, which is a result of fire making, the New York Times reported that humans were in Brazil 100,000 years ago. If you would see the New York Times video, you would note that Dr. Nidra Guidan supports her dating of human population of Brazil 100,000 years ago due to finding ancient fire and tool making. Point number 3. The original Maya, beginning with the Ocos, is illustrated by their art were black Native Americans. The Mayans were originally black Native Americans. The ancestors of the original Maya were Paleo-Americans. In beliefs around 2500 BC, we see evidence of agriculture. The iconography of this period depicts Africoids, and at Izapa, in 1358 BC, astronomer priests invented the first American calendar, in addition to numerous sculptures of blacks dating to the second millennium BC. All of these blacks have been found throughout Mexico, at La Venta, Chiapas, Teotihuacan, and Teotihuacan. The earliest culture founded by blacks was on the Pacific coast. This culture was called Mocaya. The Mocaya tradition was situated on the Pacific coast in Mexico, in the Soconusco region. Sedentary village life began as early as 2000 BC. That's right. By 2000 BC, blacks in Mexico had developed a very sophisticated culture. Between 1700 and 1500 BC, we see many other African communities in Mazatlan region, and this culture was called the Bara phase, or Ocos phase. During the Bara phase, these blacks built villages and made beautiful ceramic vessels, often with 3 legs. They also made a large number of effigy vessels. The figurines of the Ocos are the most significant evidence for blacks living in the area during this period. The female figurine from Aquiles Cerdan is clearly that of an African woman. See, here's an Ocos female. The blacks of the Mocaya tradition were not Olmec. The civilization in the Mocaya tradition began 700 years before the Olmec arrived in Mexico from Africa. Here's a picture of one of the Shirla people who lived in Mexico before the Olmecs. In most history texts, the Ocos are presented as the original founders of Mayan civilization. As you can see from the art, they do not look like Native Americans. They look like Negroes, like other Africans. The Mongoloid Mexicans do not look like the Olmecs either. Point number 4. The black Native Americans lived from Chiapas to Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras. Quatrefages and Rapanist wrote about these blacks. They are called the Negro Castachicanos. The Negro Castachicanos claim that they have never been slaves and are indigenous to Guerrero and Oaxaca on the Pacific coast of Mexico. The 1990 Mexican census recorded 66,000 Negro Castachicanos. These Mexicans live in African-style huts and practice rituals which may be of African origin, but most probably go back to the original blacks that lived in the area as early as 2000 BC. Most researchers believe the Negro Castachicanos are descendants of Maroons or runaway slaves. But none of the blacks of Costa Chica have songs about slavery and its hardships. The Negro Castachicanos say they are not, they insist, the descendants of African slaves. There was never slavery here, even in ancient times. And I quote, Bobby Vaughn noted that he found no consciousness of slavery among people in Costa Chica. Another researcher noted that housewives in San Jose, Estacia Grande, and Santiago Tapestla in Costa Chica say their ancestors did not come from Africa, that their families have always lived right here. And this can be supported by the statues of the Ocos, the Chieras, and other ancient black artifacts that I've shown you earlier. Point number 5. The Olmec came from West Africa. They spoke the Mandi language. The traditions of Mexican Indians make it clear that the founders of some civilization in Mexico came from the east and arrived in Mexico as a result of a shipwreck. This is interesting because Bobby Vaughn said that the Negro Costa Chicanos claimed that they arrived in Mexico as a result of shipwrecks. The stela number 5 from Izapa makes it clear that the Olmecs arrived in Mexico by boat. Here is stela number 5. The fact that stela number 5 depicts 12 roots as part of the tree of life support the Mexican tradition that the Easterners who brought civilization to Mexico came in 12 waves. And if you notice, the roots extend into the water. The Mexican traditions that support the spread of Olmec from the east coast of Mexico to the west coast make it clear that the Olmec lived in Oaxaca and Guerrero, in addition to Veracruz. The fact that the Olmec mentioned coming to America by boat may explain the Negro Costa Chicanos' claim that they arrived in America as a result of a shipwreck and never were Spanish slaves. Point number 5. The Olmec spoke a Mandi language. Using the Vai language, I was able to decipher the Olmec language. As a result, we can read many of the great inscriptions that these Olmec left us. These inscriptions tell us much about the civilization of the Olmec people and their religion and culture. As a result of the Olmecs playing an important role in the rise of civilization in Mexico, we find that many Mexican languages also have Mandi languages as their roots. The Mayan and Mandi languages share vocabulary items and culture terms, as illustrated in these charts. Number 6. The Khoisan took mitochondrial DNA haplogroups mtDNA L3MN and Y haplogroup E to Eurasia and the Americas. Point number 7. There are no pure Mexican Indians. Liskин noted that between 5 and 50% of Indian genes are African genes in Mexico. He wrote this article in Indigenous Population in Mexico, Medical Anthropology, the work of Ruben Liska. As a result of the Mexicans carrying so much African blood, that's why you find many Mexicans that look like Africans or Negroes, and why many Mexicans favor the Olmecs, who were Africans. Point number 8. The Meshi, Zenu, Wayu, and other African groups carry YAP plus associated AG transition at haplotype Y, DYS271. This YAP is of African origin. Point number 9. The Indian Y haplogroups C and D show African admixture at the locus of haplotype DYS271. Point 10. The American haplogroups A and B are part of the haplogroup N micro haplogroup. The Shao and Chantel and Campeche carry RM173, E1B1B, haplogroups K and T. All of these haplogroups are of African origin. Point 11. Africans carry mtDNA A. mtDNA A is common to Mongoloid Native Americans, and Y chromosome R is common to many North American Indians. As a result, we find that many of these genes are of African origin, and in fact, you'll find that Africans in Africa carry mtDNA A. Number 12. The Spanish explorers mentioned black nations and black tribes in the Americas they met, even before African slaves were landed in America. Point number 13. The Spanish said the Aztecs were blacks. Point number 14. Paul Gaffarel noted that when Balboa reached America, he found negre veritables, or true blacks. Balboa noted, and I quote, Indian traditions of Mexico and Central America indicate that blacks were among the first occupants of that territory. This is why so many Africans have African faces. This is why so many Mexicans have African faces. Point number 15. Vasco da Gama is said to have found information about the West Indies from Ahmed B. Majid, whom he met along the west coast of Africa, according to Bazan, in an article he wrote called Latin America, the Arabs and Islam. This was published in the Muslim World in 1967. Point number 16. Majid wrote a handbook of navigation on the Indian Ocean, Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, and the Sea of China. Some people even claim that Majid wrote a handbook on how to travel in the waters of the West Indian Islands. Point number 17. Africans had the boats capable of sailing to the Americas. For example, Abu Bakr, the king of Mali, led thousands of Africans to settle America in 1310 AD. Point number 18. Black native Mayan people have left iconography in the sub-pyramids of Tikal, San Bartolo, and Shultum murals, which depict the creators of these monuments as Negroes or blacks, not Mongoloid Mayan. The most exciting archaeological find has to be the Shultum murals. The Shultum murals depict not only black Mayan royalty, but also Mayan commoners and elites. Here you can see some of the black architects and engineers that built the Shultum pyramids. These colorful illustrations are by Heather Hurst. The illustration of Dr. Hurst of the Shultum figure shows that black people have dressed in bright colors and wore various scarves and other hats to cover their hair and heads. Here again is the picture of the architects and engineers that built Shultum. Interestingly, the stylized reproduction of black Mexicans from Bonampak murals at Chiapas, Mexico, are also colorful. The colorful outfits of the Latin Americans that were worn at Bonampak also are worn today by Africans who live in that area today. Point number 19. Ancient Mayan skeletons carry sickle cell. Sickle cell anemia is a disease that strikes only African or black people. As a result, the fact that you find Mayan skeletons that carry the sickle cell trait, the sickle cell disease, indicates that these Mayas were Africans because only Africans or black people have sickle cell. Point 20. There are no pure Mex Indians. There's a high frequency of African mestizo admixture ranging between 20 to 40%. The admixture rate between Africans and indigenous Mexican Indians ranges between 5 to 50%. Some mestizos may hate themselves. Their light and white skin betrays their origin as the products of white, French, Spanish, and German men who exploited their black and Mongoloid grandmothers to make the mestizo raza, or mestizo race. Many mestizos declare "Viva la raza," when in reality their faces and features tell the story of exploited indigenous black and Mongoloid women who were raped to satisfy the sexual desires of their white fathers, who murdered the husbands and lovers of their poor, mistreated, and abused indigenous grandmothers. Mestizos, like their grandfathers, seek to steal the history of black Native Americans because they are ashamed that their real history is the history of the criminals and sexual deviants who made their race mestizo. That is why when they say "Viva la raza," they're celebrating the rape and exploitation of the indigenous black and Mongoloid people. To be proud of mestizo heritage while denying the history of the black indigenous Americans is just them paying homage to the evil history of their white grandfathers. Point 21. The black Africans took their writing systems with them to America. The first Africans to introduce writing to the Americas were the Olmecs. They took writing to Mexico around 1200 BC. The first researcher to recognize that the Olmec writing was Mandi was Leo Viner in African Discovery America. He recognized that the writing on the Tuxtla statuette was written in Mandi characters. Here you can see some pictures of the relationship between the various Olmec inscriptions and Mandi inscriptions in Africa. For example, the Muhara stela, the Tushla statuette. Many of these blacks continue to use the Vite script to write into Mayan times. The Vite script was also taken to America by the Malian explorers led by Abubakar in 1310. They left inscriptions across the United States. Slave trade, African slaves used traditional writing systems to communicate with each other. For example, the Jujuka, who I believe speak a Creole language with an Akan dialect substratum. The Jujuka had their own writing system in Suriname, as you can see in these pictures. Herskovitz also recorded some Jujuka texts. Kay Howe did considerable research on the Jujuka script, and they were both able, in a sense, to show this beautiful script of ancient Suriname. As you can see, there's 21 points. Here I only provide 21 points showing the fact that the civilization that we call Mexican civilization was a civilization developed and founded by black people. These black people had been in the Americas for 100,000 years. These black people were here then, they were here when Columbus came, and they're here today. Viva la raza africana.